Well, happy weekend everybody. The visit. We're on to our last 2 chapters, and then you can either sigh a big sigh of relief, or maybe you'll be different, maybe we will be different, because every time I read it there's always something else that comes out of it. So, The Visit by Adrian Plass. And we ended it with this lad feeling tons happier, and that poor old Martin, who thought he knew everything, didn't he? Suddenly realising that maybe he was wrong after all. So, just to be totally awkward, I'm just going to have a sniffle before I start. Now normally that is what it would be edited out. I still haven't learned how to do that. So, if we're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. Chapter 5. I'd started packing at midnight on Saturday. By force of habit I did it carefully and precisely, as I always did everything. But my thoughts were in tatters. I made little whimpering noises as I folded shirts and jumpers and pushed shoes and slippers into the usual non-existent gaps. Around 1 o'clock I fastened the last strap onto the last suitcase with hands that trembled slightly but uncontrollably, and stood it in the hall next to the others. For some reason it seemed crucially important that they should be exactly parallel, and I made minuscule adjustments to each case until I was satisfied. Pushing my hair back from my forehead with the flat of my hand, I studied the assembled luggage anxiously, hoping that there was something else I needed to do. Anything to postpone the moment when guilt and fear would fill the vacuum in my mind yet again. There was nothing left to do, and no hope of sleep. I turned off the hall light and slid down into the carpet beside my suitcases. Nobody could reach me now. I had already taken the phone off the hook. Its ringing had filled me with dread for days, and if anyone came to the door I just wouldn't open it. I wouldn't so much as move a muscle until dawn. Then the taxi to the station, and that would be that. I'd hardly slept for more than a week, and tonight I knew that I wouldn't stand it any more. I just couldn't stand it. The guilt, the despair, the futile attempts to distract myself, the endless cups of coffee in the early hours, and worst of all, the flood of graphic scenes involving exposure and humiliation, pumped out remorselessly by my imagination. There were only 2 ways I could go. One, meeting the problem head on, was unthinkable. I hadn't the courage. The other was simply to go, just leave, and lose myself in the busyness of some other town or city where nobody knew or cared who I was or what I'd done. I just wanted some peace. I just wanted some sleep. Most of all, I didn't want to see him again. He was the founder of our church, back for an unexpected visit, and I blamed him for what was happening to me now. He should, have known what would happen. Perhaps he didn't care. Not about me, anyway. Since his arrival, I'd worked flat out to make sure everything went smoothly on the practical level. And generally speaking, I felt I'd done quite well. I had to learn a couple of very hard lessons about doing things on his terms instead of on mine, but it was unbelievably exciting just watching him in action, and I really had started to feel so much more hopeful and secure in my relationship with him. Recently, though, I'd begun to realise something, and it troubled me constantly. Other people who were close to him had changed. They were the same people, of course, but they seemed to be happier in some deep, quiet sense. They tended to say less, and when they did speak, there was weight and assurance in what they said. They looked as if they felt, well, loved. By him, I mean. That's the simplest way to put it, I suppose, is that they were becoming more and more like him. They maddened me. Their kindness to me made me grit my teeth. I worked as hard, as if harder than they did. I'd seen them hanging around, talking, listening, laughing, whispering often, at times when there was work to be done. 9 times out of 10, I would have been the one who ended up doing whatever was needed, and after a while I refused offers of help when they did come. Their quiet smiles, their infuriating humility, it was all too much. Still, I did wonder, what about me? Would I ever change? Did he realise how much work I did and how much I wanted to spend more time with him if I could be sure he wanted me? I began to feel bitter, lonely, and I worked even harder. Then one Friday afternoon the phone rang as I sat at the desk at home. It was one of the humble smilers, the kindest one. There had been a change of plan. Our founder had decided that he and his closest companions should go away for the weekend on a sort of retreat. I didn't think before replying. "Fine," I said briskly. "When do we start?" "Well, actually, he asked me to say that you wouldn't be needed this time. Just relax for a couple of days. You've been working hard." An icy calm enveloped me. Fine, right, I will. Thanks. Enjoy yourself." I lowered the phone slowly onto its rest and sat for nearly a minute, motionless, my hand still resting on the receiver. Won't be needed. I rather relished the surge of rebellious anger that swept through me that Friday evening. It made me feel taller, more interesting, more confident. I paced around the house, smacking walls and making aggressive noises to an imaginary audience. Not needed, eh? I'll show them. The anger in me went to my head like wine. In the past, I hadn't allowed myself to feel passion of any kind. It frightened me. It was like a bomb that would blow me to pieces if I let it. Now, for the first time, I felt released and hungry for sensation. Suddenly, my imaginary audience was not enough. I wanted to go out into the night and feel like a real person in the world. I grabbed a coat, checked my money and swept dramatically out of the front door. As I strode through the darkness, hands deep in my coat pockets, collar turned up around my ears, I felt like a character in a film. Each time a car passed, I imagined the driver catching a glimpse in his headlights of a tight-lipped stranger with the blazing eyes, and wishing he'd moved on to some dingy corner of mediocre existence, that he would be part of the wild, passionate world that this young man must inhabit. Who was he, and where was he going? He was going to the pub, and he was going to get drunk for the first time in his life. Only 3 pints, but that was 2.5 more than I'd ever drunk before. My journey home that night was not easy. The pavement seemed to roll like the sea, and I had to concentrate hard on the problem of balance as successive waves threatened to tip me off my feet. It was as I stood outside my front door, swaying gently and trying to work out a way to bring the key into contact with the lock, that someone spoke behind my right shoulder. "Are you all right, mister?" I turned round, steadied myself and focused with difficulty on the face of a woman who had spoken. She had forgotten my name, and I had forgotten hers. I knew who she was. She usually sat in the 4th row back, next to the wall in our church. She lived in one of the bungalows 2 roads down from me. She was a bit older than me. She wasn't married, and I'd sometimes wondered what it would be like to kiss her. But only in weak moments, because it was wrong, and why shouldn't I kiss her? I ached to kiss her. I'd never kissed any woman before, but I was going to do it now. It would be so sweet, so sweet. She gave a little scream as I put my hands on her shoulder and thrust my face towards her in what must have been a grotesque parody of kisses I'd seen on films and televisions. She pushed my face away with both hands and ran terrified into the roads and off under the direction of her home. The discomfort of what I suppose must be a hangover on the following morning was as nothing compared with the sick terror I felt when I remembered what I'd done to that poor woman. I suppose some people might think it wasn't much, but set against what I claimed to be, appeared to be, and needed to be for the sake of my own self-respect, it was absolute disaster. Drunk and obnoxious, I had tried to sexually assault a member of the church. I, one of his closest associates. I, who had always had so much to say about self-control and discipline and character building. I must have been mad. The following week was an endless bad dream. I sent notes out to say I was sick and spent my time roaming the house, looking out of the front window every now and then, expecting to see a policeman or a group of stern-faced elders, or of the woman herself with a posse of tough male supporters. Nobody came. I ignored the phone when it rang, and the tension increased. I hardly ate. I hardly slept. I wept over the realization that I hadn't a single friend whom I was prepared to trust with my problem. Nobody came. Nobody cared. Why stay? Now, as I sat in the darkness of the hall next to my suitcases waiting for morning, I felt a little better. Soon I would be gone. I would escape, and he couldn't stop me, even if he wanted to. I must have dozed off, because when I next looked up at the first light of dawn was just beginning to whiten the glass panels in the front door. An instant later, my body stiffened with apprehension. The silhouette, head and shoulders, of a man appeared in one of the panels. As slowly and quietly as I could, I rose to my feet, eyes wide with fear, my hands clenching and unclenching with tension. As I turned, intending to retreat to the kitchen, the silence was shattered by an absolute rain of blows on the wooden part of the middle door. I knew it was him. I clapped my hands over my ears and I shouted over the banging, "Go away, go away, I don't want you, please just go away." The reply was a single thunderous clash on the door. In that moment I remembered thinking, "You can get in without opening the door. You did it before. You did it when my mother died. Why don't you?" His voice interrupted me, tense and with urgency. "I can't come in this time unless you let me in." His words seemed to fill the house. "You must let me in." After a further succession of crashes decided me. If he wanted to come in that much, nothing I said was going to make him go away, and I couldn't stand the noise any more. With fumbling fingers, I undid the catch and drew back the bolt. As he put his hand on one of the glass panels to push the door open, panic erupted me. I didn't want to have to talk to him about what had happened. I couldn't. Desperately, I caught the door as it swung open, and I tried to slam it back against him to shut him out. Instead, to my horror, a glass panel smashed against his outstretched hands. The blood splattered the inside of the door from the cut in the base of his palm. Aghast, I stumbled back towards the kitchen. He withdrew his injured hand, and pressing it tightly against his chest, closed the door behind him. There were only two ways for me to go: up the stairs and out through the back door at the other end of the kitchen. I glanced over my shoulder and I noticed something very odd. The back door was open, wide open. I knew I'd locked it and I'd bolted it, but now there was someone in the kitchen, someone dark and difficult to distinguish from holding the door open for me. For some reason, the prospect of passing that, whatever it was more terrifying than anything else. I turned and ran up the stairs to my bedroom, pushing the door shut behind me as I went in. There was no fight left in me, no resistance at all. As I lay curled up on my bed, my face buried in my arms, I was as weak as a kitten, as fearful as a child trapped between nightmares. This time there were no thunderous blows on the door. He just knocked gently. I heard the door open and close very quietly, and then he was in the room and somewhere beside the bed. For several minutes there was silence. I couldn't even hear him breathing. When I finally risked a glance over my shoulder, I saw something I'd never seen before, something that caused the tension and the panic to disappear as if by magic. He was weeping, not noisily or dramatically, but with the stillness and concentration that betokens deep feelings. But the thing that caused my heart to leap suddenly inside of me with a shock of joy and total awareness was the certain knowledge that he was weeping for me. Those tears still welling up, rolling down his face, were for me. For me. I swung round and sat on the edge of the bed facing him as he knelt on the carpet. his injured hand pressing to his chest, his eyes still brimming with tears, fixed steadily on mine. The boss, the king, the top man, was weeping over me. And everything was going to be all right. Everything was going to be more than all right. He spoke quietly, but very clearly. You didn't understand. I fixed it for you. I fixed it all a long time ago. Getting drunk, the woman, jealousy, everything. They nailed me up for it. I bled for you. He glanced at his injured hands. I'm still bleeding for you. There was silence for a few seconds. I love you, he said simply. Do you believe me? I looked at the red stain spreading over the front of his shirt, at his eyes, red-brimmed, tired, but full of warmth. I believe you. The new happiness in me burst into a desire to do something, anything for him. What do you want me to do? Let's go out and tell everyone what happened. Or shall I get you a doctor? Oh no, sorry, you wouldn't need a doctor, would you? Well, what about... He laid a hand on my arm and smiled wearily. We'll sort everything out later. Right now, I'll settle for a cup of tea. Okay. And it was okay. At that moment, everything was okay. Wow. I didn't expect that. But you see, he does. He weeps for us. And everything was dealt 2,000 years ago on that cross. All the pain that I'm suffering recently, that was dealt with. All the problems which you're suffering with, it was dealt with. Well, I'm going to blow my nose and have a bit of a cry. And then I'll be back to read the final episode of The Visit by Adrian Plass. Hallelujah. Amen.